The avoidant left the relationship convinced that their departure would barely register, that you would struggle without their presence, that time would validate their decision to prioritize defended comfort over vulnerable connection. They carried unconscious expectation that you would remain somewhat diminished by the loss, that evidence of their importance would manifest through your visible difficulty moving on, that they would occasionally check on you and find confirmation that they mattered profoundly, even as their patterns prevented them from demonstrating that mattering through adequate presence. The avoidant maintained comfortable narrative where they were the one who got away, the complex one you could not handle, the superior party who recognized the relationship's limitations before you did. Then they see you not the depleted version they remember from the relationship's end, not the hurt person they left behind, not the diminished presence they unconsciously expected their absence would create. They see you transformed, radiating confidence they never witnessed during your time together, glowing with vitality that contrasts sharply with the exhausted energy you carried while trying to sustain connection with someone fundamentally unavailable. They observe you moving through the world with ease and joy that was absent during the relationship, looking better than you did while with them, appearing happier than they ever saw you, clearly thriving in ways that suggest their absence liberated rather than diminished you. This vision burns through every defensive narrative the avoidant constructed to protect themselves from acknowledging what their patterns cost them. The avoidant faces undeniable evidence that you did not need them, that you are flourishing without them, that removing their inconsistent presence from your life created space for genuine wellness they prevented while present. This recognition triggers cascade of uncomfortable feelings the avoidance defensive structure has no mechanism to process. Regret they cannot express, jealousy they cannot acknowledge, painful awareness that they lost someone who has become even more remarkable in their absence, devastating recognition that their defensive patterns destroyed something valuable that they will likely never find again. The burning realization that you never needed them. The avoidance self-concept has incorporated belief that people who were close to them need their presence despite its inconsistency, that their unavailability was still preferable to their complete absence, that they provided something essential even though they could not provide emotional consistency. This belief protected the avoidant from confronting that their defended position makes them functionally optional in others' lives. The avoidant maintained comfortable narrative where, despite their limitations, they were still important, still valuable, still someone whose loss would create lasting impact. They unconsciously expected that you would carry visible marks of their absence, that your life would show signs of their importance through your struggle to move forward without them. When the avoidant sees you looking better than you did during the relationship, this entire protective narrative collapses. Your visible thriving communicates with brutal clarity that you not only survived their absence but flourished because of it, that you did not need them in the ways their ego required them to believe, that their presence in your life was burden rather than blessing. The avoidant faces evidence that contradicts their most fundamental beliefs about their own significance. You look healthier, happier, more vibrant, more alive than you appeared, while trying to maintain relationship with someone who could not show up adequately. This visual contrast between your depleted state during the relationship and your thriving state after it ends tells story the avoidant cannot misinterpret. You are better without them. This recognition burns because it forces the avoidant to confront that their defended position does not make them valuable or desirable, but rather makes them detrimental to others' well-being. The avoidant's defensive structure has allowed them to believe that their emotional unavailability was quirk others should accommodate, that their patterns were acceptable trade-off for their other qualities, that people should be grateful for whatever limited presence they offered. Your visible flourishing destroys this comfortable delusion. You demonstrate through your transformation that accommodating their limitations was depleting you, that accepting their inconsistency was damaging your well-being, that their defended presence was actively preventing you from accessing the vitality and joy you now clearly possess. The avoidant also confronts that you were carrying their emotional weight in addition to your own throughout the relationship. The transformation they observe reveals that you were managing not just your own emotional experience, but compensating for their inability to provide adequate presence, bridging the distance their withdrawal created, maintaining hope through their consistent disappointment. The energy you were expending to sustain relationship with someone fundamentally unavailable now flows back to you, and the result is visible glow that makes clear how much their patterns were costing you. The avoidant sees in your transformation the price you paid for their defended comfort, and this recognition generates shame they cannot easily dismiss. The burning intensifies as the avoidant recognizes that your improvement suggests you have released not just the relationship, but your attachment to them entirely. When people still carry emotional attachment after relationships end, they often show signs of that continued investment. They appear somewhat diminished. They seem to be processing loss. They demonstrate ongoing connection, even if painful. Your visible thriving suggests you have moved beyond mere processing into genuine release. You are not just surviving without them, you are flourishing in ways that indicate their absence created expansion rather than void. This complete release threatens the avoidance ego more profoundly than anger or sadness ever could, because it communicates that they have become genuinely irrelevant rather than remaining significant even in their absence. The avoidant must also face that your transformation reveals you possess strength and resilience they never fully recognized during the relationship. The avoidant likely underestimated your capacity, viewing your patience and accommodation as weakness rather than as extraordinary strength. Your visible thriving exposes that you were never weak, but rather were channeling your considerable strength into sustaining relationship with someone who could not reciprocate adequately. Now that you have redirected that strength toward yourself, the results are undeniable. The avoidance sees that you possess vitality, confidence, and capacity that exceeds what they understood, while you were depleting yourself in service of the relationship. This recognition that you never needed them destroys the avoidant's ability to maintain their defensive narratives about the relationship's end. The avoidant cannot tell themselves that you were too needy when you clearly possess profound self-sufficiency. They cannot characterize you as unable to handle their complexity when you appear happier without that complexity in your life. They cannot position themselves as the one who got away when your visible flourishing suggests you are the one who got away from them. Every defensive story the avoidant constructed to protect their ego from acknowledging their pattern's costs collapses when confronted with undeniable evidence of your thriving. The burning also emerges from the avoidance recognition that they will likely never find another person willing to invest in them the way you did, yet you are demonstrating that you never actually needed to make that investment. The avoidant faces that they had someone who offered extraordinary patience and accommodation, someone who tried harder than most people would to maintain connection with someone defended against intimacy, and they treated that person in ways that depleted rather than nourished them. Your visible thriving confirms that you possess the capacity to flourish all along, but your investment in them was preventing that flourishing. The avoidant must acknowledge that they had access to a remarkable person who was willing to give them what few others would, and they squandered that access through their defended unavailability. The cognitive dissonance between their memory and your reality. The avoidant carries specific memory of who you were during the relationship's final period, and immediately after its end, this memory preserves image of you as somewhat depleted, perhaps anxious or hurt, carrying the visible wear of trying to maintain connection with someone emotionally unavailable. The avoidant remembers you expressing needs they characterized as demands, showing vulnerability they experienced as pressure, demonstrating emotional responses they interpreted as excessive. This memory has calcified in the avoidant's mind as accurate representation of who you are, and they have used this memory to justify their patterns and validate their decision that the relationship could not work. When the avoidant encounters you looking significantly better than this remembered version, they experience profound cognitive dissonance. The person before them contradicts the memory they have been carrying. You appear confident where their memory held insecurity. You radiate contentment where their memory preserved anxiety. You demonstrate vitality where their memory recorded depletion. This stark contrast between remembered image and current reality creates psychological discomfort because it suggests that the avoidance memory was inaccurate or incomplete, that their understanding of who you were may have been distorted by their defensive structure's need to minimize your value and justify their withdrawal. The avoidant must confront that the diminished version they remember was not your authentic self, but rather what you became under the strain of relationship with them. The person they are seeing now, confident, vital, thriving, represents who you actually are when not depleting yourself, trying to sustain connection with someone defended against intimacy. This recognition forces uncomfortable acknowledgement that the avoidant was not observing your true nature during the relationship, but rather witnessing the impact of their patterns on you. The anxious, needy, emotionally intense person they remember was your response to their emotional unavailability rather than your fundamental character. This cognitive dissonance burns because it requires the avoidant to revise their entire narrative about the relationship's dynamics. The avoidant has maintained that you wanted too much, that your needs were excessive, that your emotional responses were disproportionate. Your current presentation contradicts this narrative entirely. You appear as someone with healthy self-regulation, appropriate emotional expression, secure attachment. The avoidant must face that what they characterized as your dysfunction was actually reasonable response to their patterns, that your heightened emotional state during the relationship reflected the impossibility of getting needs met rather than inherent emotional instability. The dissonance intensifies as the avoidant recognizes that you were adapting yourself to accommodate their limitations during the relationship, suppressing your authentic vitality to avoid triggering their defensive withdrawal. The person they are seeing now is not transformed version, but rather released version you without the constant management of their defensive needs, you without the perpetual accommodation of their emotional unavailability, you without the exhausting work of trying to create intimacy with someone defended against it. The avoidant faces that they never truly knew you because you were too busy managing them to show your authentic self. The avoidant also experiences cognitive dissonance around their belief that they were the more evolved or superior party in the relationship. The avoidant's defensive structure allowed them to position themselves as the independent one, the emotionally controlled one, the person who understood healthy boundaries. Your visible, thriving challenges this entire framework. You demonstrate through your transformation that you possess the very qualities the avoidant claimed to embody: genuine independence, rooted in internal security, actual emotional regulation rather than defensive suppression, authentic boundaries rather than walls disguised as limits. The avoidant must confront that you embody secure attachment they could only perform, that you possess psychological health they could only fake through defensive control. This dissonance forces the avoidant to question memories they have relied upon to maintain their self-concept and justify their patterns. If you were not actually the needy, emotionally excessive person they remember, then perhaps their withdrawal was not justified response to your dysfunction, but rather was their defensive reaction to your reasonable needs. If you are not actually the diminished person their memory preserved, but rather are this vital, confident person before them, then perhaps their importance in your life was not what their ego required them to believe. The avoidant's entire understanding of the relationship and themselves within it becomes suspect when confronted with your current presentation. The burning quality of this dissonance stems from its challenge to the avoidant's most protected beliefs. The avoidant has organized their self-concept around being the one who knew better, who recognized the relationship's limitations, who made the right choice by maintaining defended position. Your visible thriving suggests that you were actually the one who knew better by eventually choosing yourself, that you recognized what the relationship's limitations meant for your well-being, that you made the right choice by removing yourself from situation where the avoidance patterns were preventing your flourishing. This role reversal, where you emerge as the psychologically healthier party, threatens everything the avoidant has believed about themselves in the relationship. The avoidant also faces dissonance around their expectations for how you would fare after the relationship ended. They unconsciously expected that you would struggle more than they would, that you needed the relationship more than they did, that their absence would impact you more significantly than your absence would impact them. Your visible thriving contradicts all these expectations. You are not struggling, you are flourishing, you did not need the relationship more, you needed to be free from it. Your absence has not impacted them more visibly, but your transformation suggests their presence was preventing your authentic thriving in ways their absence never prevented theirs. This reversal of expected outcomes burns because it forces recognition that the avoidance beliefs about their own importance were self-serving delusions rather than accurate assessments. The regret they can neither express nor suppress. The avoidance defensive structure has spent the relationship minimizing your importance, downplaying their attachment, convincing themselves that their defended position mattered more than connection with you. This minimization allowed the avoidant to maintain their withdrawal patterns without confronting what those patterns were costing them. The avoidant told themselves that you were replaceable, that the relationship was not that significant, that their defended comfort justified sacrificing whatever connection you offered. These defensive narratives protected the avoidant from experiencing regret while the relationship existed and immediately after it ended. The avoidant could maintain that they made the right choice, that their patterns were justified, that losing you was acceptable cost of maintaining their defended position. When the avoidant sees you thriving, looking better than you ever did with them, clearly flourishing in their absence, all these protective narratives collapse under the weight of undeniable evidence that they lost something valuable. The avoidant experiences flooding of regret that their defensive structure has no mechanism to process. They recognize that they had someone remarkable who was willing to invest in them despite their limitations, someone who offered patience and understanding that few people would provide, someone whose transformation reveals qualities the avoidant never fully appreciated while that person was depleting themselves in service of the relationship. This recognition generates regret about choices made, opportunities squandered, potential lost through defended withdrawal. The regret burns with particular intensity because the avoidant recognizes that your improvement is not random fortune, but direct result of their absence. You are not thriving despite losing them. You are thriving because you are no longer sacrificing your well-being to accommodate their defended limitations. The avoidant must face that their presence in your life was net negative, that you are better off without them, that their patterns were damaging you in ways they could not acknowledge while maintaining their defended position. This recognition creates regret not just about losing you, but about having harmed you through their emotional unavailability, about having taken someone vital and confident and depleting them through consistent withdrawal. Yet the avoidance defensive structure prevents them from expressing this regret in ways that might lead to repair or closure. The avoidant cannot reach out to apologize because doing so would require vulnerability. They still cannot access, they cannot explain what they now understand because that explanation would demand emotional exposure. Their defenses continue to prevent. They cannot attempt to restore connection because their patterns remain unchanged despite their regret. And approaching you would likely result in repeating the same defended withdrawal that destroyed the relationship initially. The avoidant is trapped between genuine regret about what they lost and complete inability to act on that regret in meaningful ways. This inability to express regret creates internal torment that intensifies rather than diminishes over time. When people experience regret, they can express through apology, through attempts at repair, through conversations that provide closure. The regret eventually processes and resolves. The avoidance unexpressed regret has no outlet, no resolution, no path toward processing. The regret accumulates within their defended psychology, creating pressure that cannot be relieved because relief would require the very vulnerability their defensive structure exists to prevent. The avoidant carries permanent awareness of what they lost while lacking capacity to address that loss through expression, repair, or even honest acknowledgement. The avoidant also experiences regret about their own limitations rather than simply about losing you. Seeing you thrive forces recognition that their defensive patterns prevented them from accessing relationship with a remarkable person who is right in front of them. The avoidant regrets not just that the relationship ended, but that their defended position prevented them from ever fully participating in the relationship while it existed. They recognize that even during the relationship's best moments, they were held back by their defenses, unable to reciprocate adequately, incapable of matching your investment. The avoidant faces that they squandered time with you by remaining defended when they had opportunity to be genuinely present with someone worth being present for. This regret extends to recognition that their patterns may prevent them from ever accessing satisfying intimate relationship with anyone. Seeing you thrive reveals that the problem was not incompatibility between you, but rather the avoidant's fundamental limitation around intimacy. The avoidant faces that they will likely encounter the same dynamic with anyone they become close to. Their defenses will prevent adequate presence. Their patterns will eventually exhaust even patient partners. Their defended position will cost them relationships with people who could have enriched their lives. This recognition that losing you represents not isolated incident, but rather pattern that will repeat, creates regret about their defended approach to relationships generally, rather than simply about the specific loss. Yet simultaneously with experiencing profound regret, the avoidant cannot suppress defensive reactions that minimize that regret. The avoidant psychology fights against fully feeling the regret because full acknowledgement would require confronting that their entire defensive structure has been counterproductive, that their patterns have cost them experiences that make life meaningful, that their defended safety has actually created the very isolation and loss they organize their life around preventing. The avoidant oscillates between moments of genuine regret and defensive dismissals that minimize your importance, between recognition of what they lost and narratives that justify why the relationship could not have worked anyway. This internal battle between authentic regret and defensive minimization creates additional layer of torment. The avoidant cannot fully experience the regret because their defenses keep intervening with justifications and rationalizations, yet they cannot fully suppress the regret because your visible thriving provides undeniable evidence that their defensive narratives are false. The avoidant is caught in perpetual tension between what they genuinely feel and what their defenses require them to believe, unable to resolve the contradiction because resolution would demand examining and potentially dismantling the very defensive structure that creates their psychological safety. The burning quality of this unexpressed and unsuppressible regret stems from its permanence. The avoidant will carry awareness of what they lost for years, perhaps for their remaining life. They will occasionally think of you, remember how you look now compared to how you looked with them. Recognize that they had opportunity with someone remarkable and destroyed that opportunity through their defended withdrawal. This awareness will surface at unexpected moments, creating fresh waves of regret that the avoidant can neither act upon nor fully suppress. The avoidance's defensive choice has created permanent psychological consequence that no amount of rationalization can fully eliminate. The jealousy of watching someone else receive what they refuse to provide. The avoidant maintained throughout the relationship that they could not provide consistent emotional presence, that their limitations were fixed constraints rather than chosen patterns, that their defended position reflected their maximum capacity rather than their defended choice. The avoidant positioned their emotional unavailability as something beyond their control, as fundamental aspect of who they are, rather than as defensive adaptation they could potentially modify. This framing protected the avoidant from accountability by suggesting that expecting more from them was unreasonable given their inherent limitations. The avoidant could refuse to provide adequate presence while maintaining that they were doing their best within their constraints. When the avoidant sees you with someone new, particularly when that new relationship appears healthy and mutual, they confront devastating evidence that you can inspire level of investment and presence they claimed they could not provide. The avoidant watches you receiving consistent attention, reliable presence, emotional availability from someone who demonstrates that providing these things for you is not burdensome, but rather is natural expression of caring about you. This observation destroys the avoidance narrative that you wanted too much, that your needs were excessive, that meeting your requirements would have been impossibly demanding. The avoidant faces that your needs were entirely reasonable and that someone without their defended limitations can meet those needs without apparent difficulty. This recognition triggers jealousy that burns with particular intensity because it forces the avoidant to acknowledge that they chose not to provide what you needed rather than being unable to provide it. The avoidant sees someone else offering you what they withheld and recognizes that their withholding was choice rooted in defended comfort rather than genuine limitation. The avoidant could have been more present, could have offered greater consistency, could have provided more adequate emotional availability. They chose instead to maintain their defended position, and now they watch someone else receive the version of you that blossoms when your needs are actually met rather than constantly frustrated. The jealousy intensifies as the avoidant observes that you appear even better with your new partner than you did during your best moments with them. The avoidant sees you laughing more freely, engaging more openly, demonstrating confidence and ease that you rarely showed during the relationship. This contrast reveals that you were perpetually constrained during the relationship with the avoidant, managing their limitations, suppressing your authentic vitality to avoid triggering their withdrawal. With someone who can actually meet you adequately, you flourish in ways the avoidant never witnessed because their patterns prevented you from accessing your full self. The avoidant recognizes that they never saw the best version of you because their defensive limitations kept you in constant state of adaptation rather than allowing your authentic thriving. The avoidant also experiences jealous recognition that your new partner is receiving investment and effort from you that the avoidant took for granted during the relationship. The avoidant sees you demonstrating care, offering support, providing emotional presence to this new person, and recognizes that these are capacities you offered to the avoidant that went unreciprocated. The avoidant failed to adequately value or return your investment, treating your considerable effort as baseline expectation rather than as gift requiring reciprocation. Now, someone else receives that same investment and apparently recognizes its value, reciprocating in ways that create mutual rather than one-sided dynamic. This observation forces the avoidant to face that they squandered opportunity to have mutually satisfying relationship with you. The relationship failed not because you lacked capacity for partnership, but because the avoidant's defended position prevented them from being adequate partner. The avoidant watches evidence of what the relationship could have been if they had possessed capacity to show up differently, sees concrete manifestation of potential that their patterns prevented from being realized. This witness to lost possibility generates jealous torment, because the avoidant recognizes they had access to exactly what they are now watching someone else enjoy, but their defended limitations prevented them from utilizing that access. The jealousy carries additional burning dimension because the avoidant cannot express it without revealing their own insufficiency. If the avoidant were to articulate their jealousy, they would have to acknowledge that they recognize the new person is providing what they refuse to provide, that they see you flourishing in ways you could not flourish with them, that they understand their patterns prevented relationship success that appears possible with someone less defended. This acknowledgement would require vulnerability and admission of fault that the avoidant's defensive structure continues to prevent. The avoidant must experience the jealousy in silence, unable to express it without exposing their own limitations. The avoidant also experiences jealous awareness that time is revealing them to be the limited party rather than you. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant maintains subtle superiority, positioning themselves as the more independent one, the less needy one, the person with appropriate boundaries. Watching you thrive in new relationship exposes that you were never the limited party, but rather were a limitless person constrained by relationship with someone defended. The avoidant faces that you possess capacity for healthy partnership that they lack, that you can participate in mutual relationship while they can only maintain defended distance, that your relational capacity exceeds rather than falls short of theirs. This role reversal, where you emerge as the more capable party, generates jealous shame about the avoidance defended limitations.